Tears of the Kingdom, the latest game in the series and sequel to Breath of the Wild, introduces many new story elements that affect the overarching story significantly, complicating things substantially by exploring the era of Hyrule's founding. When comparing the events of the past game's lore, many things either don't make sense or are directly contradicted. So much in fact that many interpretations of how the game's story could fit in the timeline have arisen. With this video, I'll attempt to explain how Tears of the Kingdom fits into the timeline, so you can consider this video a part 2 to the Fixing the Timeline video. I'll place the game and its events into the timeline developed in the video at the end, so if you haven't seen the first video, I highly encourage you to do so. To be able to properly discuss Tears of the Kingdom, we must first go over its story alongside Breath of the Wild's in isolation, outside of the other games, as there is a lot of information to unpack. Long ago, in a time considered myth, the descendants of the gods known as the Zonai descended to the surface world bearing secret stones handed to them by the gods, powerful gems capable of amplifying the holder's power. Over the many generations, the Zonai aided the civilizations of the land to develop and thrive, constructing great structures for them, including the great city of Gorondia for the Goron tribe, or the Stormwind Ark for the Rito. Long after, the Zonai civilization perished for reasons unknown, with the last remaining members of their civilization being a pair of siblings, a Zonai man named Rauru and his older sister, Mineru. Rauru met a Hylian priestess named Sonia, a woman in whose veins flowed the blood of the goddess Hylia, and before long they joined in holy matrimony. Together, they established the kingdom of Hyrule, and united all the races under their rule, all except the desert people known as the Gerudo, led by their king, Ganondorf, a male born into their tribe once every 100 years, destined to become king as per Gerudo tradition. Ganondorf hated the Zonai for their arrogance, for laying claim to the world and looking down from high above to the other races with the godlike power which they kept to themselves and took for granted. It is during the rule of Rauru and Sonia that a young woman appeared from the future bearing a secret stone that amplified her power of time. Her name was Zelda, the princess of Hyrule and daughter of King Rhoam from the era of the Wild, as well as a distant descendant of Rauru and Sonia themselves. She had been sent back in time by the secret stone after a catastrophic event in her own era. Presented as a distant relative of theirs, and dressed in clothes of the era to not raise suspicions, Zelda was taken to Rauru's and Sonia's castle atop the Great Plateau. It wasn't long until the Gerudo king assaulted the kingdom with a swarm of Moldugas, which Rauru, aided by the time powers of Sonia and Zelda, quickly dispatched. Seeing that brute force would not grant him results, Ganondorf changed his strategy and swore fealty to the king of Hyrule, all in an attempt to garner their trust and steal the secret stones from the monarchs, to then take over Hyrule. Luring the queen to the castle courtyard and using a puppet in the shape of Zelda as a distraction, Ganondorf killed Queen Sonia and stole his secret stone, which amplified Ganondorf's power of darkness, transforming him into the Demon King. The Demon King then gave rise to legions of demons, who laid waste to the kingdom, as Rauru and Zelda retreated to safety with Sonia's body to the Forgotten Temple. With Hyrule in the brink of defeat, Rauru summoned the leaders of the 4 races of Hyrule and asked them for their aid in stopping the Demon King, entrusting each of them with secret stones. They all swore to serve Rauru, the King of Light, as sages. On the day before the battle with the Demon King, Zelda warned Rauru of the events that took place in her time, how she encountered the still living mummified Ganondorf deep beneath Hyrule Castle, sealed away by Rauru's hand, which would mean that Rauru would perish in the upcoming battle. Despite this, Rauru assured Zelda that even if that were the case, it was his duty as King of Hyrule to try and stop the Demon King. And just as Zelda said, the battle took a turn for the worst. No matter how devastating the blows of the allies of Hyrule were, they did next to nothing to the Demon King. His power far exceeded their combined strength. Knowing they had lost the battle, Rauru performed a final act to ensure the safety of the kingdom, by sacrificing himself to seal the Demon King for millennia, and telling Ganondorf that even if the seal were to break, a hero would rise in the future to defeat him. After the imprisoning war, Zelda visited the remaining surviving sages and asked them to lend Link their power, to which they promised that a sage would awaken in the future to aid the princess's swordsman. At the Temple of Time, Zelda obtained the Master Sword, which was sent back by Link through a mysterious golden recall orb of light of unknown origin. With the Master Sword in hand, Zelda realized the reason she had been sent back in time, in order to restore the Master Sword for Link to defeat the Demon King. After speaking to Minoru about her decision, Minoru placed her soul within the Pura Pad to aid Link in the present as the Sage of Spirit, and Zelda then swallowed her secret stone, becoming an immortal dragon who would slowly heal the Master Sword with her sacred light over the many millennia, at the cost of losing her humanity and sense of self. Following the transformation of Zelda into the Light Dragon, the Temple of Time and the land it sits upon were raised high atop the sky by the ancient sages, in order to protect them from the Demon King and his followers, as the hero who would defeat the Demon King would one day awaken at this very site. To ensure the seal remained intact and prevent anyone from accessing the imprisoning chamber, the Hylians of the era built a large castle above the seal of the Demon King, which would come to be known as Hyrule Castle, and no one, not even the royal family, was permitted from ever venturing beneath the castle. Countless eras passed, and history turned to myth, and as Ganondorf's body festered beneath the castle, his malice would come to manifest as Calamity Ganon, which would be suppressed time and time again. The technologically advanced Sheikah, in order to prepare for the rise of Calamity Ganon, built legions of guardians and powerful titans piloted by warriors from the 4 races of the world, which suppressed Calamity Ganon upon his eventual return, by aiding a hero who wielded the Master Sword and a princess with the sealing power. However, Calamity Ganon would inevitably return 9,900 years later, and regardless of the prophecy which led to unearthing the buried lost technology of the Sheikah, they would have never anticipated Ganon's plan to turn their own mechanical armies against them. Hyrule was decimated, and the kingdom left in ruin, but the princess suppressed the Demon King within the Hyrule Castle, while the gravely wounded hero recovered within the Shrine of Resurrection for the next 100 years, who swiftly defeated Calamity Ganon upon his awakening a century later. With Calamity Ganon defeated, and Zelda now freed from Ganon's grasp, Hyrule's recovery would commence, followed by several years of peace. However, sickly gloom began to emerge from beneath Hyrule Castle, plaguing the kingdom with sickness, and so the princess and her knight descended deep beneath Hyrule Castle to find the cause of this ailment, soon encountering the sealed corpse of the Demon King. After Ganondorf's violent awakening, which damaged the hero's arm beyond repair and shattered the Master Sword, the Demon King fell to the dark depths of the chamber, soon followed by Zelda, who was then transported to the past by the Secret Stone, and the gravely wounded Link was taken by Rauru's arm to the Great Sky Island, where the first king of Hyrule replaced Link's arm with his. What followed was the event that came to be known as the Upheaval, a cataclysmic event caused by Ganondorf, which raised Hyrule Castle to the sky, caused gloom chasms and caves to appear across Hyrule, and ruins of the ancient Sonai civilization to rain down from the islands high in the sky. After awakening in the Great Sky Island and meeting the spirit of Rauru, Link obtained the Lights of Blessing from the shrines and opened the great doors of the Temple of Time, where he found a glowing orb of light which Link used to unknowingly send the Master Sword back in time to Zelda's hands. After reuniting with Purah on Lookout Landing, and easing her mind after his and Zelda's disappearance, Link headed to the 4 races of the kingdom to find clues of Zelda's whereabouts, aiding them with their struggles after the upheaval caused by the 4 demons sent by the Demon King to prevent the descendants of the sages from obtaining the secret stones. Tulin, Yunobo, Sidon, and Riju all awakened as the sages of wind, fire, water, and lightning respectively, and after Link faced off against Phantom Ganon atop this floating Hyrule Castle, Link worked together with Kakariko's chief Paya, the leader of the Sonai research team Tauro, and Dr. Caleb to uncover the clues to find the 5th remaining sage, Mineru. Link's last goal before facing the Demon King was to obtain the Master Sword, found atop the head of the Light Dragon, where it had fully healed and regained its strength to combat the Demon King. With the sages by his side and Master Sword in hand, Link faced and vanquished the Demon King once and for all, and Zelda, with the combined power of Rauru and Sonia's spirits, returned to her human form. When attempting to reconcile the lore of Tears of the Kingdom with the established lore of the prior games of this series, we begin to encounter quite a few complications. Primarily, the main issue we encounter is the uncertainty of if the establishment of Rauru's Kingdom of Hyrule is meant to be the same Hyrule we explored in Ocarina of Time, or a re-establishment of the kingdom after the old one ceased to exist. Depending on the answer, the implications for the series are huge. Let's explore both scenarios. Let us begin by analyzing the main threat of this game, Ganondorf. Assuming that Tears of the Kingdom's past events are taking place before Ocarina of Time, Ganondorf from Tears of the Kingdom would be sealed underground, while both a Ganondorf in Ocarina of Time and Force's adventures would coexist in Hyrule with that sealed Ganondorf. This is lore-breaking on multiple aspects. For one, Ganondorf is the incarnation of the Mice's hatred. Having 2 Ganondorfs coexisting would raise the question of who is the real incarnation of the Mice's malice and hatred. The title given to Dark Beast Ganon in Japanese is the incarnation of hatred and grudge, grudge being the Japanese word for malice. This is the exact same terminology used by the mice in his speech. This makes it clear that Calamity Ganon is the incarnation of the mice's hatred. So, given that Tears of the Kingdom's Ganondorf gave rise to Calamity Ganon, what about Ocarina of Time Ganondorf? We must look at the nature of Calamity Ganon for a second, as it is quite important. When we read the description of Calamity Ganon in Breath of the Wild, we get this description: the source of darkness that has appeared time and time again through Hyrule's history. It's been called many names, from Great King of Evil to Calamity. The title Great King of Evil, or as it's in Japanese, Great Demon King, is the same title used not only in Ocarina of Time, but also in the description of the Phantom Ganon armor from Breath of the Wild itself. And in Tears of the Kingdom, they changed the name of the armor set to Evil Spirit Armor. the Japanese name of which being the title seen for Phantom Ganon in Ocarina of Time, with the description removing any reference to the Great Demon King, but it's still obviously the Phantom Ganon from Ocarina of Time. Creating a champion goes into more detail in various pages. On page 363, it has this to say in the section of the history of the Gerudo. A boy is born into the all-female Gerudo tribe, as happens every 100 years. He is named Ganondorf. Ganondorf plans to take control of Hyrule. He transforms into Dark Beast Ganon and is sealed. Ganon, having long lost his reason, becomes Calamity Ganon, a pure incarnation of hatred and malice for the royal family of Hyrule and the chosen hero. And on page 401, we get a more detailed account of the events. It is written that Calamity Ganon once adopted the form of a Gerudo and, since he was the rare male born to the Gerudo, was made king. But that wasn't enough for the man known as Ganondorf. He plotted to seize control of all Hyrule and became the Great King of Evil. The only person standing in the way of his machinations was a young man with the soul of the hero who wielded the Master Sword. His plans shattered, Ganondorf lost control, and his powers consumed him, transforming him into the Dark Beast Ganon. After being defeated by the hero, he was sealed away by Princess Zelda and the other sages. His hatred for the hero and the princess is legendary. He revived again and again, only to be sealed many times over. Eventually, the Demon King Ganon became hatred and malice incarnate, holding a deep grudge against Hyrule itself. It is abundantly clear from the information in both Breath of the Wild and Creating a Champion that Calamity Ganon was undoubtedly Ocarina of Time Ganondorf. Yet Tears of the Kingdom retconned this completely. Now, Calamity Ganon is completely unrelated to Ocarina of Time Ganondorf, being a new incarnation, as Calamity Ganon was spawned from his mummified corpse deep below Hyrule Castle. Yet Ganondorf from Ocarina of Time is still mentioned in Tears of the Kingdom. It isn't like they are erasing him from history. One of the Sora monuments found on a cliff north of Oren Bridge that was written by Sidon reads the following. It is written that long ago there was a strong-willed Sora princess who was as meandering as a winding river. The princess, who was dearly loved by her fellow Sora, was as noble as she was innocent. Her name was Rito. One day, a powerful and wicked man tried to take over Hyrule and brought great ruin to the once peaceful Sora's domain. Our tales speak of fallen Sora soldiers drifting down the river as it sadly reflected the chaotic retreat of the terrified Sora. Princess Rito bravely fought back her tears as she bore witness to the tragic misery unfolding in the domain. Even amid her heartbreak, the Sora princess did all she could to help the weak and elderly escape. Next, she swam against the river's current and climbed the mighty waterfall to challenge her foe. The details of this fight have fallen victim to the haze of time. Few details remain. Still, it is said that she was aided by the Princess of Hyrule and a hero of legend, and together they saved Hyrule. So the legend goes. I, Sidon, Prince of the Sora, cannot help but ponder these events as I listen to the Sora children play in all their innocence. As Princess Rito's descendant, it is my fate to carry the torch of her brave acts into tomorrow and beyond. I shall not fail. So, if we are to assume that Tears of the Kingdom's past are before Ocarina of Time, what's the deal with Ocarina of Time Ganondorf? Even if we were talking about a soul split akin to Aghanim, or rather the proper Japanese term, bunshin, meaning alter ego or other self, this also wouldn't make sense. The nature of a bunshin has been explored multiple times in the series, seen with Aghanim, Ciela, and Oshus the Ocean King. When a person splits their soul, they retain their memories, as seen with Aghanim and Oshus. Ciela, however, lost her memories when she was attacked by Bellum, who stole and consumed her memories, which it later spat out during the battle within the Temple of the Ocean King. Had she not been attacked, she too would have retained her memories as a bunshin. As bunshin retained their memories, If Ocarina of Time Ganondorf were to be a bunching of Tears of the Kingdom Ganondorf, he would know of his other self that finds himself sealed under the castle, and would attempt to free himself. Aghanim, being the bunching of Ganondorf who was sealed within the Dark World, had the mission to free Ganon, or rather his other self, from his seal. A bunching of Tears of the Kingdom Ganondorf would be no different. Yet at no point in Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, Wind Waker, or any other games does he attempt to free his other self from his prison beneath the castle. If we place the events of Tears of the Kingdom's past after all the known games of the timeline, and consider Rauru's kingdom as a re-establishment of the Kingdom of Hyrule after the old one, for reasons lost to time, ceased to exist, then Tears of the Kingdom's Ganondorf could be a new incarnation of Ganondorf long after Ocarina of Time Ganondorf's Reign of Terror, so far in the future that any mention of Ocarina of Time Ganondorf would have erased his name from history, only remembering him as a wicked man. What may have happened instead is that, as history became myth, the events of Ganondorf from Ocarina of Time and those from Tears of the Kingdom blended together, where people believed that the Ganondorf that fought the hero of time became the Calamity. Something similar happened with the Sonai themselves. In creating a champion, we learned this about the Sonai. The history of the Sonai people has been lost to time. There are rumors that they were a savage tribe based in Faron, where the most substantial of the ruins are located. However, Sonai ruins, or ruins with very similar characteristics, can be found in all parts of Hyrule. In addition to the massive palace in Faron, the Sonai ruins throughout Hyrule seem to have elements connecting them to the ancient shrines. The Sonai themselves are spoken of in hushed whispers, as strong magic wielders who vanished suddenly thousands of years ago. The disappearance of the Sonai is one of Hyrule's greatest mysteries. Tears of the Kingdom, however, tells us a much different story, with the Sonai being descendants of gods who came down from the heavens with great power. However, when comparing the architecture of the Sonai of the Sky and the ruins from Faron, Thyflo, and so on, we see that their architecture is significantly different. There is a reason for this, which is hinted in Tobia's Hollow, where we can see that the architecture of the so-called barbarians is encasing the architecture of the Sonai. And the same can also be seen with the dragon heads in the Sonai ruins, with the fully uncovered dragon head actually being visible on Dragon Head Island. When we complete the quest of Thyflo ruins, we also learn that the ruins were built by the ancient Hylians of the time in honor of the sages who fought alongside Rauru during the imprisoning war, explaining why the monuments found in the ruins are written in ancient Hylian and not the Sonai language. Thyflo ruins, and by extension the Sonai ruins and all other ruins of the same architecture, were built by the Hylians of the time after the imprisoning war, and over time, these so-called barbarians were misremembered as the Sonai. So, like the Sonai being misremembered as barbarians, the history of the different Ganondorfs could have also been misremembered and misinterpreted. The Gerudo have a tradition where a male who is born once every 100 years into their tribe is to become their leader. Creating a champion tells us something interesting regarding this on page 401. According to Gerudo records, there has not been another male Gerudo leader since the king that became the Calamity. This is true, as all Gerudo chiefs we have seen in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom have been women. No male Gerudo aside from Ganondorf have ever been seen or mentioned. We know it is incredibly rare for males to be born into the Gerudo as per NPCs in Breath of the Wild, and in the 100 years since the Calamity, where Urbosa was chief, Riju's mother was chief, and then Riju after her mother died, but not a male Gerudo. Ganondorf's presence must be preventing the birth of another male Gerudo since the conditions are not met, as a male Gerudo still lives. So in more ways than one, a male Gerudo king has not happened since the king that became the Calamity. If we are to say that Tears of the Kingdom's past is before Ocarina of Time, this would be a direct contradiction, as if they abolished the law of a male Gerudo becoming king, then Ganondorf in Ocarina of Time would not have become king of the Gerudo by law. In fact, he would not exist at all, given a male Gerudo would still be alive under Hyrule Castle. However, this problem does not happen if we assume the past of Tears of the Kingdom to be after the known timeline, as the law of the Gerudo was not abolished in Ocarina of Time, that we know of, so in the distant future, a new incarnation of Ganondorf could be born and become king again. The Gerudo in Ocarina of Time had round ears, while the Gerudo in Tears of the Kingdom's past have pointy ears, all except Ganondorf. On page 401 of Creating a Champion, this is said regarding the ears of the Gerudo. It is said that, long ago, the ancient Gerudo had rounded ears. The prevailing theory is that the shape of the ears changed gradually after so many generations of partnering with Hylian foes. But a competing narrative is more supernatural in nature. There is a story that the shame that the Gerudo felt over giving birth to the social calamity Ganon so long ago opened them to listening to the messages from the goddesses. So, they came to have the same long, pointed ears as the Hylians, which some believe allow them to receive special messages from the divine. Now, as I stated earlier, Calamity Ganon was intended to be Ocarina of Time Ganondorf in Breath of the Wild, but that was retconned, and part of this was too, since during the time where the king that birthed the Calamity was alive, the Gerudo had pointed ears, not round, so the second theory of them opening their ears to hear messages of the gods after turning their backs on Tears of the Kingdom's Ganondorf is not true. But it could be true for them turning their backs on Ocarina of Time Ganondorf, despite him no longer being the source of the Calamity, if we viewed Tears of the Kingdom's past events to be after Ocarina of Time. If we viewed this game's past events to be before Ocarina of Time, the argument could be made that they lost their ears as a divine punishment by the time of Ocarina of Time. However, regardless of both interpretations, the issue is Ganondorf. Why, when all other Gerudo have pointed ears, including Koume and Kotake, whom we will discuss later, is Ganondorf the only one with rounded ears? If the gods can give pointed ears to people, they can also take them if they commit terrible crimes against the gods. But by that time, Ganondorf had not done an act so horrible that would warrant a divine punishment, unless, of course, it carried over from his past life as Ocarina of Time Ganondorf. The Gerudo in Ocarina of Time also had yellow eyes, a predominant feature of the tribe along with the red hair, like the Sheikah having white hair and red eyes. However, in Tears of the Kingdom's past, and during all the events of the present, the Gerudo all have different colored eyes, same as with the Sheikah. The only Gerudo who retains their yellow eyes is Ganondorf. The colors of their eyes, similar to the ears, must have been as a result of their breeding with Hylians, creating a multitude of genetic variations, and the same can be said for the Sheikah. If we look behind Ganondorf in the memories the Gerudo assault, as well as a sure fealty, we can see two distinct Gerudo women behind the king of the Gerudo, who wear golden masks adorned with blue and red jewels, and satchels of red and blue writings in katakana, which read Koume and Kotake, just as they did back in Ocarina of Time. These are the witches Koume and Kotake, or Twin Rova, Ganondorf's surrogate mothers, seen in a much younger form than in any other time where they have appeared in the series. During the events of Ocarina of Time, we learned that Koume and Kotake are around 400 years old, as they enhance their lives using dark magic. As Koume and Kotake are younger than Tears of the Kingdom, and live to be 400 years old in Ocarina of Time, the events of Tears of the Kingdom, assuming they took place before Ocarina of Time, would be more than 300 years before Ocarina of Time. This, however, comes into conflict with the events of the Minish Cap and Four Swords, since these events would have to be even before those games. We first have the War of the Bound Chest, who knows how long before the establishment of the kingdom. We know that it is certainly not during its founding years, as the king at the time is believed to have been King Gustav, who was friends with the Wind Tribe before they left for the sky, who in turn knew the Picori and worked with them to build automations such as the armors, so this was after the Picori descended during the War of the Bound Chest. We know that Gustav is from the distant past, and that the door of the Picori opens once every 100 years, indicating a repeated pattern, which means that the war took place a few centuries before the Minish Cap at least. Definitely more than 1 century, so at least 200 years, potentially more. We then have an unknown amount of time pass between the Minish Cap and the first sealing of Vati from the backstory of Four Swords, which could have been centuries, but after that, a long time passed, leading to the events of Four Swords, taking place a few centuries at least, given the Four Swords Sanctuary is overgrown with vegetation. And then, we have the so-called Prolonged Wars, the fierce war that took place before Ocarina of Time, where the Sheikah were believed to have perished both in Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess, which must have taken place a few centuries after. And of course, we haven't even mentioned the Triforce War, which A Link Between Worlds mentions that the royal family which was present at the time grieved due to the conflict of the kingdom, and then ordered the 7 sages to seal the Triforce away. The timescales don't add up. However, assuming that Tears of the Kingdom's past events are after the known timeline, this would be new iterations of Koume and Kotake after the ones we've seen in both Ocarina of Time as well as the Oracle games, same as Ganondorf, Link, Zelda, Impa, and all other recurring characters with the same names as their predecessors. We learn in Tears of the Kingdom that the Hyrule Castle we see in present times was built immediately after Tears of the Kingdom's imprisoning war, in order to preserve the seal, with the castle's maintenance being directly tied to the seal's strength, with the description of the Demon King Ganondorf stating that he was imprisoned beneath Hyrule Castle for ages, but the magic holding him weakened when the castle was damaged during the calamity a century ago, and his power has steadily been growing since. Then, this is said about the construction of the castle on a monument beneath the castle itself. Deep beneath this sacred land, our mighty first ruler imprisoned the Demon King. To ensure the king's magic would hold, we erected a castle here to protect this sacred site. Without the castle in place, the site may be disturbed, allowing the Demon King's hatred and rage to be revived. The preservation of this castle is therefore tied to the prosperity of the kingdom. May it watch over an eternal peace. Hyrule Castle in Ocarina of Time was completely decimated, not once, but twice. Once by Ganondorf himself when he took over the kingdom, to build Ganon's castle, which he then raised on a piece of land above the lake of lava. But then his own castle was also destroyed, following his defeat, which means that if Tears of the Kingdom's past really is before Ocarina of Time, Tears of the Kingdom Ganon would have broken free from his seal long before the events of Tears of the Kingdom, assuming that Ocarina of Time's castle were the same one from Breath of the Wild's era. And even if it isn't the same castle from Ocarina of Time, which I don't think it is, this would mean that there would be 2 castles in Hyrule during the events of Ocarina of Time, and no such castle is ever seen in that game, or any games after it. And Ocarina of Time isn't the only game where the castle is damaged or destroyed. At the end of Twilight Princess, after Midna teleports Link and Zelda away to deal with Ganondorf herself, Ganondorf blows up Hyrule Castle too. But if we instead have the castle be built after the known timeline, then this issue is resolved. When it comes to the establishment of the Kingdom of Hyrule itself, we learn in Tears of the Kingdom that the Zonai were descendants of the gods who came down to the surface land bearing secret stones gifted to them by the gods. They developed advanced technology using Zonite mined from the depths, and guided civilization into a brighter future, with the Kingdom of Hyrule being established nearing the end of their civilization, where the only Zonai remaining were said to be Rauru and Mineru, with the rest having perished. However, we learn a very different origin of the kingdom in Twilight Princess, where Shad, a Hylian scholar, tells us of the Uka, the Sky People. According to Shad, The Uka were a race said to be even closer to the gods than the Hylians, and that contrary to popular belief, it was not the Hylians who created the kingdom, but the Uka, and once the kingdom was created, the Uka built a capital of their own and raised it to the sky, while simultaneously maintaining contact with the royal family of the surface through the use of the Dominion Rod, only to be carried by the messenger of the heavens. While both the Sonai and the Uka share advanced technology and magic, and are considered sky people, as well as both are attributed with the construction of the Temple of Time respectively, their differences are clear. For one, the Uka are not direct descendants of the gods. They were surface dwellers and the ancestors of the Hylians. The Temple of Time we see in Twilight Princess that was constructed by the Uka is undoubtedly not the same temple built by the Sonai. In fact, it was the Hylians who built a later Temple of Time closely resembling the one from Ocarina of Time, while simultaneously being quite different, as it didn't possess the Chamber of the Master Sword. Then we have their appearance, with the Sonai resembling humanoid goat people and the Uka chicken people. Now, a common argument from even before Tears of the Kingdom is that the Uka once adopted humanoid forms to be able to construct their technology. I agree with that. However, they can't be evolved Sonai, simply due to the fact that the Sonai ceased to exist in their entirety during the rule of the first king of Hyrule. Even their architecture is completely different, and the technology, as well as the origin of the Sky Islands. While the Uka used technology and giant propellers to raise their civilization to the sky, the Sonai raised their civilization using technology developed using Sonite, specifically hoverstone technology. These two groups are in no way, shape or form the same, so having the events of Tears of the Kingdom before Ocarina of Time would be a direct lore contradiction. However, if we instead have Rauru's kingdom be a re-establishment, and the Sonai serving a similar purpose as the Uka, then that issue is resolved. And finally, we have the Rito. From Wind Waker lore, it was established that the Rito evolved from the Sora, and if the events of the past of Tears of the Kingdom were to be before Ocarina of Time, we would have Rito existing before the establishment of the kingdom, and then Rito evolving from Sora despite Rito already existing. By having the events of Tears of the Kingdom after the known timeline, this will become a non-issue, as the Rito will not come into conflict with their evolution from Sora in the Wind Waker, and will be regarded as a continuation of that race and not a new race entirely. Because of all these points, I am of the belief that the kingdom that Rauru and Sonia established was a Hyrule long after the kingdom that we knew from the prior games fell, and their events became nothing more than myth in an era even further back than the descent of the Sonai, with the history of Hyrule repeating itself in a cycle with no end. This would have a new incarnation of Ganondorf appear once again, raised again by new iterations of Koume and Kotake, with Ganondorf from Ocarina of Time by the time of these events not being remembered by name, and instead only as a wicked man, the warning of his name in legends being erased from history by time. The Rito would be a continuation of those that emerged from the Sora, with Medli, the Sage of Earth, still being referenced by name with Divine Beast Vamedo. The Sonai would then serve a similar purpose to the Uka, both being sky beings with highly advanced technology who built temples of time and established the Kingdom of Hyrule, while also having their unique differences. We'd then also have a new imprisoning war, not to be confused with the imprisoning war from A Link to the Past, with a new Rauru as a Sage of Light leading a new group of sages. In fact, we could even consider the battle between Hylia and the Mice, which led to the imprisoning of the Demon King as the imprisoned prior to Skyward Sword, as yet another imprisoning war, essentially having 3 imprisoning wars in the series, perhaps more if we count Ganondorf's seal in Ocarina of Time, or the sealing of Ganondorf in the Twilight Realm.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme, every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one. Hopefully it'll work.
Essentially, this would be a soft reboot of the franchise, with the prior games still being part of history, but simultaneously not being relevant to the plot, only seen as canonical references, history turned to myth, just like how the Sonai became myth. This approach would give Nintendo complete and total freedom to create any story they want, as they would not be restricted by the events of the timeline, something they have expressed openly was a problem for them and their creativity, causing their desire of wanting to move away from the timeline. So then, how would Tears of the Kingdom fit into the timeline we discussed in the Fixing the Timeline video? Before we begin to dive deeper into the timeline of Tears of the Kingdom, there is a slight revision I'd like to make to the timeline, and that is the time frame between Ocarina of Time and the Great Flood, as the Hylian text of the prologue legend at the start of the Wind Waker states that the flood actually took place a short time after the sealing of Ganondorf. This means that the seal was either rather weak, or Ganondorf, being in possession of the Triforce of Power, managed to break free faster than anticipated. This also makes it possible for Daphne Snow-Hansen Hyrule to actually be the king of Hyrule Ganondorf bowed down to in Ocarina of Time, as at no point in Ocarina of Time did we actually get confirmation of his demise, and he could very well have escaped from the castle and then reassumed the throne after Ganondorf's fall. With that small revision out of the way, the inclusion of Tears of the Kingdom, based on all that was discussed previously, will make the timeline look like this. Long in the future, for reasons lost to time, the Kingdom of Hyrule created by the Uka ceased to exist. After an unspecified amount of time, the Sonai descended from the heavens to the surface and guided the people into a bright future. Long after, Rauru, one of the last Sonai alongside his older sister Minoru, establishes a new kingdom of Hyrule alongside a Hylian priestess named Sonia, becoming the first king of this new kingdom. Zelda arrives in the past after Ganondorf's awakening in the present. Ganondorf kills Queen Sonia, steals his secret stone, and becomes the Demon King, and with his summoned monster army, launches an attack across the kingdom. Rauru summons the leaders of the races, appoints them as sages by granting them secret stones to amplify their powers, and Rauru sacrifices himself to seal the Demon King during a conflict that came to be known as the Imprisoning War. Zelda, after receiving the Master Sword from the future, in order to restore the blade for Link to defeat the Demon King in the present, swallows her secret stone and becomes the immortal Light Dragon, shedding all that made her human forever, the ultimate sacrifice. The sages raise the Temple of Time and the lands it stands on skyward to protect them from the Demon King and his followers, as the hero who will defeat the Demon King would one day awaken at this very site. To ensure the seal remained intact and prevent anyone from accessing the imprisoning chamber, the Hylians of the era built a large castle above the seal of the Demon King, which would come to be known as Hyrule Castle, and no one, not even the royal family, was permitted from ever venturing beneath the castle. Long into the future, the calamity of 10,000 years ago would take place. Then, 9,900 years after this calamity, another devastating calamity would take place, only this time they would not be victorious against the calamity. 100 years later, the events from Breath of the Wild would take place, and several years after Calamity Ganon's defeat, perhaps 6 years later, like the real-life year gap between Breath of the Wild's release and the release of Tears of the Kingdom, the events of Tears of the Kingdom would take place, where Zelda would travel back in time, starting an endless time loop ending with the defeat of the Demon King at the hands of Link. That was a lot to unpack, especially for just one game, but I wanted to be as thorough as possible when dealing with this game's story, since there is a lot to unpack for such a large game. This isn't to say that this is a definitive answer. Truth be told, we really have no confirmation of where these events of the past actually take place within the context of the grander series. This is just my interpretation given the evidence presented, and perhaps this could be disproven in the future as more evidence presents itself, such as developer interviews, or be reinforced. We won't know for sure until it happens. If you like this video, please leave a like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to get notified of future uploads. Also, consider following me on Twitter and Instagram to stay in touch. This has been Zelda Lore, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.